make sure that if anyone has some questions, and Brian, where did you go? Brian Bannon, please join us on stage if there are some questions for these final two presenters. And we should acknowledge your parents.
And my parents are here.
Yes.
They have a lot of cameras out. That's them.
Yes, there's a question in the back, comment in the back. Anyone up front?
Well, the microphone's going. I have a question. When can we get Piper in our library?
There you go. Your first client. They just want you to stand in the light because they're filming you.
Do I want to be in the light, though? I don't know. So that's a great question, and that's honestly the best question you could ask. So we are currently in the development stages of Piper, so we are working on making it into a pretty product that you would want to buy. But hopefully in the next few months we'll be launching a Kickstarter, so we'll have to keep your eyes out for that, and we'll start shipping in the next year, hopefully.
Yes.
I'm not sure I will phrase this right, but I am so excited to see that you are trying to get the tools of technology into the hands of these kids. I've been in education for 35 years as a high school teacher and currently as a pre-service physics professor. So here's my big dilemma. We have these kids who the technology is what they're all about. That's what they want to do. We have the businesses who need that. How do we identify what we need to teach the kids at the high school level, first of all? In other words, how do we get that to the teachers so that they can teach the kids? Because somebody has to build those virtual reality helmets, right? And then the second part of that, and this is the part that is really frustrating to me, is because we used to have ways to work with teachers through Eisenhower funds and federal grants. That's pretty much gone away, pretty much dried up. And so the professional development that teachers get, they have to pay for, or districts provide it. And so you have this gap of these kids who are wanting to do the technology that you're talking about. You have the teachers who would love to teach it, but they don't know it. They don't understand it any more than you do. And I was looking at your little fish robot or whatever. How wonderful would that be for a teacher to then be able to take that to the classroom and teach all the kids, not just the ones who got to go to the museum. But the teachers can't build on it because they don't have an understanding of it either. And so to me, there's this huge gap of what we need, but there's no way to really get there. And the gap, to me, just seems to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger at a faster rate. And as a result, your teachers are quitting or leaving because they're not comfortable with it. So how do we know what the businesses want? How do we provide that to them? And how do we link the businesses with the educators who want to help but don't know how?
Well, I don't know if I have a full solution for you, but I do think that you're pointing out a really important issue. And within libraries, we have the same concern, which is how do we invest in our people so they can provide these new services that we know that people need and want. And in fact, we have actually been training, those Finch robots actually were initially designed so that teachers could check them out and take them to their classrooms, but we are actually now offering workshops for teachers to learn how to use them for just that purpose. I think that there's a bigger issue in my view. So part of, I think, what your question got to is how do you get kids excited and motivated to learn these different tools? And then how do you create an environment where that can happen in a way that it matches the way a kid wants to learn? And I do think that we're in a transition, and I don't know education well, I know libraries well. What I do know is that that informal spaces, I think this is where museums and libraries and other informal learning environments can really help. Because we are in the business of creating spaces that support people's interest-based learning and populating those spaces with people who are working in the fields that can actually mentor kids one-on-one. I think, unfortunately, it isn't as simple, at least in my view, teaching a class on computer programming. It's, the way you talked about working with your father, getting you excited about science and spending time with you. It's exposing kids to people who know and have those passions, and if those passions align with those kids, then they can follow that passion. But it's, I think it's, the solution is more in terms of getting kids an opportunities to experiment and play, and having access to people that can help inspire them to, to go beyond. But I don't know that, I don't know. It's hard.
I can just throw my 2 cents in there. When I was thinking about this problem of sort of how fast technology is progressing, it is virtually impossible for a teacher to know all of it and to like be able to explain it to their students perfectly every single day when the technology out there is changing so much every single day. So it's very daunting, and it's a bold undertaking to say, like, we are going to teach kids all about technology, like all the technology that's out there. So I think it really goes back to what Brian was saying about giving kids sort of a chance to explore themselves, because that not only just opens up this entire realm of them discovering technology on their own, but it also opens up them discovering the technology they are excited about on their own. And I think that's where the biggest sort of potential for advancements in technology, for like people who will build the next virtual reality. I think that's where it lies.
Yes.
What is the mission of the Chicago Public Library?
Well, in short, we say read, learn, discover. But in my view, when we look at libraries in general, we're really trying to expose people to the leading ideas of the day in order to make a more competitive, democratic, and hopefully thoughtful society, which is a larger, more macro mission. But that's how I would normally answer it.
Great, and I encourage you as we're moving towards closing, not just to have questions for the two of them, but any reflections you have on the day. It's been a information-packed day, but anything that you'd like to share with the group, especially just heard about the need for more professional development for teachers, new models of that, new sources of support for that. That's clearly one thing that I would hope would come out of a conversation like today's.
Alston Roberts. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I apologize. Alston Roberts here. When looking at Chicago and what you're doing in your library, I think that's fantastic. Some of the issues in our country is cities are looking at their budgets and they're cutting back. And so schools and libraries are usually some of the places where those cuts get hit first. I was wondering if, are you looking to corporate sponsorships to be able to fund these programs, or is your city stepping up and saying, we're going to pay for these things?
It's both, and that's a great question. Marissa Meyer, who used to be at Google and now is not at Google, she's running another big tech company. One of my favorite sayings, she said, "Creativity loves constraints," and I think that we like to use that in the public sector, or in the public sector. That we are, Chicago Public Library is 3 times the size of the San Francisco Public Library, and our budget is the same. So we have a budget challenges. That said, I think that there are ways to. I mean, these things don't necessarily cost a lot of money. I mean, a Finch robot is $100, and what we found is the business community, particularly for some of these more tech-focused initiatives, are incentivized to help, and we expect the business community to help. We expect individuals to help, and people to either help with their pocketbooks or to help with their time. Mentorship, I think, is an incredible part of this, or an important part of this formula. We pay mentors through private dollars to come into our spaces. We're also increasingly working through partnerships with universities and others to bring in working artists and professionals who can connect and mentor with our kids. I do think that, and I have colleagues around the United States that struggle with budgets in the same way that we do. But frankly, I just think you just got to figure out how to work with it and use it as an opportunity. So some of it's private dollars, some of it's just sort of using it as an opportunity to think in a new and fresh way, and then some of it is asking the city to ante up. And I think what we found in Chicago is that as we've anteed up, those of you who follow Chicago or don't, when Mayor Emanuel came in, he wasn't necessarily he had some really tough choices to make in the city, and libraries were a choice he had to make some reductions along with some other city departments. But as we've worked to really show how libraries can be an important part of where the mayor and the city is going, we are now seeing new investments in the library. So the work that we're doing with digital media and learning in teens was a pilot at the Harold Washington Library, our main library, now at 11 locations, in part due to about $1.5 million of new investment in teen librarians that are paid for by the city. And we're able to leverage that investment to get additional private philanthropy. So, I mean, it's a combination, and there's no simple solution.
Yes.
My name's April Soy, and I am a product of Fort Worth ISD, just also a hometown girl like you, Shree. I don't have 35 years in education, but I've got about 20. And I'm so excited by the solutions-oriented approach that we've all been able to be a part of today. We've talked about a lot of the challenges. One challenge I don't think we have addressed really goes back to something that you mentioned earlier about how Finland and some other countries, they're listening to the research that we're doing here in the United States. But in some of the same articles that I'm sure you've read as well, we're not listening to our own. And so we're back to that research to practice gap. And I think that takes us to the discussion of standardized testing and how teachers' hands are tied by those tests. So not to end on a negative note, but to throw out there a little piece of reality that I hope that we can all come together in a solutions-oriented way to address, because we obviously have some of the answers here in this room. We just have a big wall to get across.
Yes, and changing, we haven't had time to really address the whole question of tests and assessments, but changing the assessments is critical to this, and there's some good work going on to change the way in which we measure learning in our schools. We have the standards, the Common Core standards, the Next Generation Science standards, and now along with that, a more challenging set of assessments coming. So that's the good news, and there'll be a lot of controversy about that. The first thing that will happen is that the school districts that have done well on the standardized tests, their scores will go down. That's to be expected, but there's a lot of pull and tug around that. When you somehow see, oh my gosh, they're not doing as well on these more challenging tests, there will be a period over the next few years where there will be some pushback about that. But the good thing is if we assess this kind of learning we're talking about, that'll help us get to this new kind of learning, because what gets assessed is what gets taught. Yes?
Shree, you said it was a Kickstarter initiative that got you going with Piper. Is that true? Do you have patents for your technology? Have you filed for intellectual property?
So we haven't actually launched the Kickstarter yet. It's supposed to be launched either this November or in January, and I will probably be harassing everybody about it. At the moment, we are working with an intellectual patent lawyer in San Francisco, but I don't completely know the details of that.
The thought is that if you and others like you developed these products and had these tools, that in and of itself might spur the development of other technology.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Hopefully.
Hopefully. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Comment in the back? Yes. You're getting your 10,000 steps in.
I'm a huge proponent of museums and the blessings and gifts that they offer to the community and libraries. In my role as a teacher trainer, providing staff development, how can we help our learners, both student learners and adult learners, connect with the amazing opportunities, resources that are available through libraries and museums? How can we do a better job of making those connections for our learners?
So you mean as people working within libraries and museums, how can we do a better job?
How can we collaborate
Yeah.
better as educators? How can we, in the education system, collaborate better with museums and libraries who are also in the business of education?
Yeah.
How can we take advantage of the resources and the blessings at our fingertips?
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I've seen, anecdotally, I've seen a lot of great examples of partners. Certainly in Chicago, we're doing some interesting things with schools and museums. I understand that the Summer of Learning was talked about in Chicago a little bit, that we've, for the first time, well, this is the second summer that we've done it, where we got all of the institutions that serve kids over the summer working together on a badging program. What was, I think, really interesting about being part of that initiative, certainly the technology and the tools to help give credit to kids for their learning was a really important piece of that. But I think even more than that, it was an opportunity for all of these various different folks who operate in the learning ecosystem, particularly for kids over the summer, who have a hand in supporting a child's learning and reducing the summer slide. It created an opportunity for those institutions and organizations to begin working more closely together. And actually, as a result of that initiative, sort of a side benefit, we've forged partnerships with folks in Chicago that we actually wouldn't have worked with before. And I think it's easy, and I'll use the library as an example, for us to think that we're kind of the one and only. And while we do a lot of work with out-of-school time learning in libraries in Chicago, we're just one piece, one node of that. And but I think some of these these types of sort of citywide initiatives are a good way to do it. But also, I've seen I've seen other cities where museums have opened up their doors to do education and training opportunities for librarians and teachers, and I've seen libraries do that for and I think more of those types of opportunities. And if there's funders in the room, it's always great if there's somebody who's sort of forcing that collaboration, as part of their sort of funding conditions.
I just wanted to make a brief observation about this last comment, if I could. I mean, a couple of observations. One is that almost all of the museums we're talking about here today offer programs for schools and school teachers to come in and use their resources, but it's a common experience, I think, among museum educators that despite their best efforts, what's available isn't always understood by teachers in some parts of the community. So anything that teacher trainers can do to get trainee teachers to think more broadly about the resources that are available to them and the teaching and learning styles that they might adopt to achieve what they want to with their students, that would help. And the second observation I would make is that, again, almost all the museums we're talking about, I'm sorry I'm talking more museums than libraries, but that's my experience, make use of volunteers or interns. And my museum, for example, we have a regular throughput, small but regular throughput of teachers who come to work with our educators doing work. We heard Milton talk about the Chicago initiative to make better use of the long summer. And in some of those initiatives, it would be wonderful if teachers with some of those in the community who came forward to help put together innovative programs at times when perhaps their own schools are not in session. So things like that could make a big difference, I think. Just better synergy between these different sectors. Sorry.
No, that's super. And just to add a couple more suggestions, a lot of cities offer educator open houses where their museums get together and kind of give an open house to help teachers know. So that's one thing. I think another thing that is very helpful is when the museums and libraries can partner with teacher preparation programs so that they can acquaint the teachers in training before they even get in the classroom about how to make really good use of community resources. I think another thing that's really helpful is for the museum educators and the librarians to actually listen to what teachers want. Because sometimes museum educators say, well, I did this whole workshop and it didn't fill up, or I did this workshop for 30 teachers, but that's not going to scale. So how do you have museum educators start from a position of what are my community needs? And because museums are really pretty organized, like a lot of us collaborate with other museums, thinking a little bit outside that box. So like what are the different kinds of partners? Like, Brian, you gave awesome examples of unusual partnerships with different kinds of organizations, but organizing those groups into collaborations that then take a regional or citywide approach and actually do some user analysis and user research to understand what is it that the teachers in our specific city need from us, and then design programs from there. I think those are some kind of concrete other things to add.
Any final thoughts, comments, questions?
I just have a quick final thought, actually. Sorry, up here. So I have to say that as a part of this generation that you guys are talking about, that grew up with this sort of technology and that's seen so much progress just in the 20 years I've been alive, I find it incredibly uplifting, especially in a time when we hear a lot of really bad stuff about technology and education. We hear that we're 20th, and we hear a lot of very
negative things a lot of the time. So it's very, very uplifting to be here, to be in the company of so many people who are really doing extraordinary things to be able to change that, to be able to push the bounds of what we know and to help my generation do something incredible. So from my generation, thank you for this discussion.
Thank you. Great. Please give a final round of applause to Brian and to Shree.